Hello, welcome to the latest webcast for Digital Badge Academy. I'm Jim Daniels, your co-host. As usual, here with David Leaser, fellow co-host. And David, we have somewhat of an education series that we are going to be focusing on for the next 3, 4, 5 weeks or so.
Yeah.
What we're
So,
going
I
to go
mean,
into.
we've given this an awful lot of thought, and we know that there are really five phases to creating a world-class, powerful digital credentialed or digital badge program. And so, what we're going to do over the next several weeks is we're going to walk you through what those five phases are. So you'll have a firm understanding of what happens in each stage and make sure that you have everything lined up. And I think this is really important because I think many people don't even realize the groundwork, Jim, that you need to do before you even get started meeting with your stakeholders.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the case. And I think, too, for the benefit of those who are watching this webcast right now, it's probably worth our while to actually show, first of all, just as a way to ground this conversation that's going to unfold over the next few weeks, what those 5 steps are. So I'm putting a picture up on the screen right now, and it's going to show these 5 key steps or 5 phases, if you will. And this is literally what's intrinsically woven into the approach that we take when we work with clients, right? And of course, it starts with setting that solid foundation up front. And that's what we're going to focus on today, specifically. But I also want to not leave everybody I don't want this to be mysterious, right? The other 4 phases that follow include the getting buy-in and managing change. There's the actual structure of your badge program, building out a credentialing framework, operational and governance models and things of that nature that need to be put together. There's implementation and setup, and finally setting the stage for success. So we're going to peel back the onion, so to speak, around each of these and provide everyone with a sense of what each of these phases actually entails and why they're important.
So let's start with phase one. Phase one is really setting the foundation, and that is the discovery and enablement session. Jim, maybe talk maybe real briefly about, what is this about?
Yeah, exactly. So this is where we always start. And interestingly enough, I think it's the most important aspect of when you sit down and you start to think about, okay, what do we want our digital credentialing initiative to be in service of? If to answer that question, you really have to start with a discovery and enablement process to kind of dig in and develop a strategic understanding of what your actual objectives are going to be. It's really all about bringing some innovative thinking to the process, doing a bit of comprehensive research, pulling in stakeholders from across the organization that are essential to making sure that this program gets developed in the proper way. And it's also, and this sounds a little bit cliche, but I think it's important. It's also the point where we sit down and we develop a vision statement, which is that really, future or forward looking kind of major goal that you really want to try and or outset of outcomes you want to try and achieve with this program. But we also spend time digging in a bit and creating a mission statement, which is a little bit more detailed in terms of how you're going to go about satisfying that goal. So that's essential to what we cover in the setting the foundation.
And I think people at this stage, it's really is also really having a deep understanding of what badges can do and what they can't do, and particularly what they can do, what they look like. I know people often think that a badge is a thing, right? And Jim, as you always say, badge is not the thing, it represents the thing. People say,
Exactly.
well, I need to create a badge, but you don't have to create the badge. You already have an activity, an underlying activity. And
That
so, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to just say that's exactly right. The badge is not the thing, and in fact, in terms of creating badges, that's easy. That's simple. Again, it goes into what is that badge going to be in service of? What is it going to represent? What kind of utility is it going to bring forth for the benefit of the various stakeholders that are involved here? Which we always categorize into 3 areas: the issuer, the earner, and the consumer.
So you mentioned the mission and the vision and the values and all that, making sure that it ties to that. So if you have a mission in your organization, how is the digital badge program or digital credentials going to support that mission and advance that mission? That's one. And then also, I think, Jim, the use cases, you have to start to think about what is this in service of? What is the Monday morning problem that you're trying to solve? You don't just create badges just for fun. They're here either to help you make money, save time, increase something or decrease something.
You don't want to start, and it's really easy to, for instance, in an L&D environment, to just look at the training you're delivering. You may have phenomenal structure around that, and that can be really tempting to just go in and immediately start configuring badges around the training that you're delivering. But that is not the place to start. Never. There really needs to be a needs assessment, right? In fact, there's really three primary objectives. One is the needs assessment. So, it's really doing a detailed analysis to really dig in and understand what your organizational needs really look like. That Monday morning problem is a great way to frame that. It's looking at learner demographics, learner needs, and how that maps to organizational goals. And so all of this needs to come together so that you can start to structure and lay out a set of specific goals that are going to tie into why you're implementing this digital badging program. We also dig into and look very closely at the different badge earner personas, right? So being able to identify and, more importantly, document those badge earner personas allows you to build kind of a set of attributes that are essential to being able to understand what the kinds of professional development pathways look like for these different personas, right? What are the kinds of motivational factors? You can't just assume that one part of an organization or one target audience is going to be motivated in exactly the same way as another. There's going to be different factors that come into play there. And because to some extent, what you're trying to do is drive behavior by developing these credentials and using badging as a way to deliver those credentials. So that's really key, and it's
Yeah, I
also
think I was
essential
I was
for.
I was going to say on that one, Jim. I just not to. I'm sorry to interrupt, but
No, go ahead.
I think what you mentioned that you have to dig into deep on this because there are going to be employees that have personas. There are going to be developers, and I think the idea that a developer has the same type of motivations that a person working in marketing, they're probably not going to have the same motivations at all, right? I mean, and you might require different type of techniques to attract them. Gamification might be more interesting in that world.
Exactly, that's a great example. Or one of the other really common situations where you get into motivational factors that have to be considered, or when you're creating a digital credentialing strategy that's targeting an internal employee ecosystem versus a digital credentialing strategy that's targeting an external audience. Maybe it's your customers, your clients, right? Or maybe it's business partners, or it's some other external audience. The differences there can be substantial. And so all of those come together to really heighten the importance of being able to understand those different badge earner personas.
You really have to create that. I mean, you think about a professional audience, Jim. I mean, professionals understand the value of LinkedIn, but what if they're students that are just coming out of high school? They don't even really they don't understand why they should create a digital resume.
Well, exactly. I mean, that's exactly it, right? And to uncover all of that in the right way and to make sure that you're not overlooking something really important, this brings us to the third really key objective around this discovery and enablement process, and that's the stakeholder engagement objective, making sure you pull together all the right people to inform this process that you're about to go through to stand up a digital credentialing program. Now, all of this may sound complex. It's actually not. It's just being aware of these things and taking action to ensure that they're part of the process. But one of the things that you would want to do is have collaborative sessions with these different stakeholders from across the business that understand what these different earner personas look like. You may have different people in the organization that are focused on things that are important to the business outside the boundaries of the company itself, whereas there's other folks, yet again, that are wake up every day and their concern is with the employee ecosystem. So you need people from both areas, as an example, to come in and be part of this effort to actually nail down what your credentialing program is ultimately going to be in service of.
And I think that this is where and we have a template approach to all of this. That's how we do it. I
Exactly.
mean, and it's very, I think that really makes it very easy to be able to plug into a template all of these different things, kind of like a business model. Canvas helps you figure out your go to market and everything else. The templates for this badge program really make it easy. And I remember when we were creating the IBM digital badge program. Well, I had come off this smarter workforce, developing the smarter workforce category at IBM, and I was in charge of the messaging and the marketing behind that. And so my only interest at that point was how many social media impressions we would get. That was my use case for digital badges at the time. And then, of course, increasing engagement in our online communities. That was it. But when I started having meetings with some of these key stakeholders, my message didn't resonate with them at all. Support didn't care about social media impressions. What they wanted to do was reduce the number of phone calls coming into the company.
Exactly.
You know,
Right.
Sales didn't care about that. They wanted to see how many more leads we're going to get from this. And so this is really a valuable time to create that key stakeholder analysis. And then when you start bringing them in to the process, they become owners.
And there's another really important reason for having that component in place as well is some target audiences may already be tuned in to this movement around digital credentialing and using badges in that. Other target audiences, maybe not so much. So if you think about just the kind of communications and the narrative you need to build around a program that you're standing up, um, what kind of promotional messaging and that sort of thing that you put out there, that may have to be tailored. So again, it just underscores why it's so important to make sure there's representation from different parts of the business who know and understand these different target audiences.
So that's a perfect segue because then, so at this early stage, you're doing all this gathering of information. You're starting to maybe use a templatized approach to gathering this information. Then at the end of stage one here, phase one, there are
Mm-hmm.
certain things artifacts that you need to add to your toolkit. So Jim, what would be the deliverables that if you're building a program like this, that an organization would say, we need these as some of our foundational documents?
So, from a deliverable standpoint, the first thing that we focus on is creating that project charter document. And that product charter document is what we're using to capture all of these inputs that are coming, whether it relates to the vision and mission statements, it could be input from all your different stakeholders, it's persona level detail, it's KPIs that would be formed. What kinds of objectives and outcomes are you trying to drive? All of that gets built into a charter document, which ultimately becomes the basis on which everything that unfolds thereafter ties back to. So that's the first thing.
Yeah, and then the next thing is, you mentioned the personas. So I think that's something you need to call out, right?
Well, exactly. So it's not just a question of identifying the personas. There has to be an analysis of those personas. So besides the charter document itself, we spend time once we have those personas identified and documented, doing an analysis. What's important to those different personas that we've identified? What are the motivational factors that resonate with this group versus the other group, right? All of these kinds of details have to be considered if you're going to ultimately have a program that achieves high impact status across the full breadth and depth of what you're attempting to do.
And then executives are always concerned about the dependencies and the risks. And when
Yeah.
you're building a business case, this is part of it, right? I mean,
Well, exactly. There's, any kind of project has risk and dependencies. So we want to make sure that those potential risks are surfaced. Any dependencies are surfaced. Obviously, where there's risk concern, we want to spend time looking at how we can mitigate those. You don't want to encounter a risk somewhere downstream in this process that you didn't take the time to uncover early on, right? Because that can really trip up a program. It can cause you to lose momentum. I've seen it happen in organizations where they just kind of went off without this kind of structure, and they get to a point and they hit some snag and they get discouraged, and the program just ends up, dead on the vine. If you spend time up front understanding these risk and dependencies, it gives you the opportunity to build a risk mitigation plan and be able to address it, which gives you then the opportunity to be able to address those changes or challenges as they arise, right? And that's the whole point of that. It's really kind of project management 101 relative to that, but it's important to have it as part of the deliverables, in phase one of this
And there are
approach.
dependencies. I mean, there are dependencies on how much time people are going to need to spend. Is it going to have is it going to affect another downstream program? I mean, well, when we started developing the whole digital credential strategy at IBM, which goes beyond just badges, it had what some people thought was a risk to the certification program because that was the old way of doing business.
Mm-hmm.
We created all these product focused certifications instead of role based certifications. And when we rolled this out, we said, why aren't badges being used for the product stuff? And let certifications be the role based, which is inevitably where it went.
Well, exactly. That's a great example. Another really good example, and this question comes up every time. It's one of the things you can literally bank on is how do we make sure we don't dilute the value of our program by over badging? That's typically how that question gets posed. And it is a risk. I don't think it's a if if you're approaching things in a thoughtful way and in an organized way, it's a risk that is super, super easy to mitigate and to eliminate for that matter. But it is a risk. So it's another example of why you need to be thinking about those things and
So,
have
yeah.
a deliverable that, some sort of tangible deliverable that documents that so that you have something to reference along the way.
Yeah, so this is the time that you have to kind of preempt or start to think about what kind of questions am I going to be asked by my key sponsors. That's because that's coming up next. After we do all this groundwork, the key sponsors are going to ask you a lot of questions. Think about what questions are going to be on their minds and make sure that you have those answers in advance. And then I think the next one is really laying out the vision, Jim, right? Being able to lay out the high level vision for people so they can see what is this world going to look like when we do this?
Well, exactly. And it ties into what you were just saying about, being able to articulate this project and what it's in service of and how it's going to deliver value and all of that. Sometimes you need to put that into a format that not only tells people what you're doing, but shows them. So the high level design concepts start to surface during phase one as well. And I have to emphasize the term high level here because they truly are high level. There's quite a bit of work that happens downstream to really start to dissect and get in and start to architect what the final design structure is going to look like. But you can certainly, by this point, create some high level design concepts that might be wireframes to help people, visually understand what this looks like, how it kind of ties into different parts of the business, how it reaches out and touches the different target audiences and so on and so forth. So that is something that we always want to put in place because again, it really helps to have that kind of tangible artifact in place to share with this not only the stakeholders but the sponsors, right? So hopefully, and we haven't even mentioned this at this point, but one of the other things that we really focus on in phase one is helping people identify the right kinds of executive sponsors to have as part of this. And an executive sponsor certainly is a stakeholder, but that kind of leads us to the next one.
Yeah, and so back to the stakeholders. So you've brought these stakeholders in this early stage. They're going to want to make sure that you heard them clearly, and so you're going
Exactly.
to need to create a readout for them to make sure that you capture everything that they have, right?
Well, that's exactly right. So we refer to it as a stakeholder analysis report. So during this process that unfolds during phase one, we're gathering information from all the different stakeholders. We're really looking, we want their specific perspectives on what's important to them, just their point of view, right? Any concerns that they may have, as well as recommendations that they can bring to the table. You don't have to be a credentialing expert at all to be able to come in and participate in a valuable meaningful way in this process. So there can be recommendations that surface as part of this. So we build a stakeholder analysis report based on all these inputs that really lays all of that out in a very clear fashion.
And you bring up a really good point, and I keep going back to the IBM program, but the IBM program started, it started with, hey, we want to do this badge program thing. But it really started with a Monday morning problem at IBM. It was trying to get more people, more big data developers into the IBM ecosystem. How do we get more, upskilled and reskilled, and then buying our Big Insight product? And they knew nothing about digital badges. They knew nothing about digital credentials. They didn't care about certifications. They didn't care about anything like that. All they cared about was, how do we attract more big data developers? And I think that there are so many opportunities if you know, widen the aperture to what are the problems that we need to solve in our organization, and how do we lead our organization?
Yeah, exactly. And it's also why a lot of times when I sit down with clients for the first time and start to have these discussions, I like to table the conversation about badging and digital credentialing, right? Because quite frankly, that's the easy part. It's understanding ultimately what that badging and digital credentialing is going to be, as we've said over and over, in service of, right? What kind of utility it's going to provide. You have to understand these things, just like you mentioned, right? With this part of the business that was trying to attract developers, build this really robust developer ecosystem by getting people to come in and engage in training that was being made available for free out on a public facing website, as an example. So once you understand those kinds of desires and needs and why they're important to those businesses, it makes it much, much, much easier to then think through what's the right way to come at that sort of objective from a credentialing standpoint to help that stakeholder meet those objectives.
So this is what you do to get set the stage for success. Get things, get everything, all your assets lined up. The next thing we're going to do on the next part of our series is, how do you get buy-in for all of these different ideas?
Yeah, yeah, and that's an important one, and it'll be an interesting one to cover. So there we are. You're right. So for today, we've covered phase one, setting the foundation, and we'll be back in a week with the next installment.
Thank you.
Are you looking to launch a digital badging program or improve an existing one? Look no further than Digital Badge Academy. Our highly popular online masterclass will help you gain the skills and insights necessary to achieve success. Enroll now and start learning today.